This is exciting. Is it supposed to last long? The storm? We're having a thunderstorm here. Do you know?
2 hours.
2 hours, nice. Yeah, lots of, all night, lots of whipping trees and rain and wind. So we're just waiting for Sokuzan to come, and also Ondo has my book that I'm teaching from tonight. So the theme for tonight is again about returning to the Hinayana. Oh, yes. Why are you laughing?
Because I had to have a hat.
Oh, okay. Thank you. We were talking last week about the Hinayana and how important or how much of a reminder Trungpa Rinpoche gave to his students to not forget the Hinayana. And it was Sokuzan's recommendation to look into the Hinayana, into the Pali Canon. And of course, it's some of my favorite material because it feels not quite as confusing as what some of the other texts we study in the Mahayana tradition, even the Vajrayana tradition. I also love it. I was just reflecting on the moment that I first heard the word of the Buddha. And there is a word for that in Pali, just like there is in Christianity, the word of God, but there is the word of Buddha. And so many of our sutras, so many of the teachings are what the Buddha said. And it's a type of teaching where you're not necessarily reading the philosophy, which you would be in the Abhidharma, but in the Pali Canon, a lot of it is just what the Buddha said. And I was reflecting on the first time that I heard what was it? I think the 4 marks of existence. And I was in a basement in Russia with fluorescent lights. I was all by myself. And all of the other Russians were upstairs listening to the talk in Russian. But I got to listen to the talk in English on a VHS cassette that they put into a tiny black and white TV. And I still remember being crouched in that plastic chair with my knees up, tired from sitting still for so long, and being told that life is suffering. Just that one phrase, it was like something was dropped into my brain that made sense. And so I speak to you all from a place of being fellow truth seekers. That's what we're here for, is to see the truth. And the miracle, and it does seem like a miracle, that there are words carried down through thousands of years that could reach our ears. Thank you. I'm being really nice so far. So I was just investigating the Pali Canon, which originated, it's the oldest of our texts. We talk about it as the teaching of the elders, the Theravada texts. And they are a vast amount. It's a vast amount of information. So we talk about the Tripitaka, which means the 3 baskets. And the 3 baskets are divided into 3 sections. So the three baskets are the Vinaya, which is the code of conduct. Then there are the Nikayas, which are divided into 5. And then there is the Abhidharma. And I'm speaking today from the very first Nikaya. So you can see how thick this is. And there are 4 more of these. all equally thick, if not thicker. This one is called the Digha Nikaya. And I think of it as Buddha's greatest hits. It has his most popular teachings in it. It has repetitions from other texts that are very popular, the Satipatthana Sutras in here, along with a lot of other ones that are repeated in later texts, but the Digha Nikaya is called the long, the book of long sutras. So the reason I reflect on how miraculous it is and how I want to just sit for a moment in how this could even reach us, the Dharma, how the Dharma can reach us. The Dharma can reach us through a living teacher, but that the Dharma can reach us through words that were, the story goes, spoken 500 BC-ish. They were then remembered, the story goes, by Ananda after the Buddha's passing at the first Buddhist council. And at that point, they became an oral tradition for hundreds of years. Nothing was written down until the time came, and that was in the first century BC, where because of famine and war, these were written down first on leaves, tree leaves in Sri Lanka. And we have no record of those. They are all dust at this point. But it is said that that was the first time they were written down. So hundreds of years after the Buddha said them, they were maintained in verbal, through oral traditions. And then they were written down and they were copied. They were translated. They were taken to other countries. They were perhaps edited. Korea, Tibet, China. They went from the language of Pali to the other languages, buried in tombs, and somehow we have quite a bit of words. And they're really interesting to read. I think I will read a few pieces that I find. It'll be like story time for a little while, Buddha story time. In this Digha Nikaya, there is the story of Buddha's last days, quite long, describing him and Ananda and how the monks asked him what his final requests were, how he passed, and the position he passed, the words he spoke before he passed. There is the Satipatthana in this text. I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of just the density. One of my favorites, which is the creation story. Have you heard of the creation story of the human being? And then there was this very juicy chapter, which I found because this is Sokuzan's book, and in the back, he wrote page 223. So there's page 223, which I'll share with you as well, which happens to be underlined quite a few times, about the 12 links of dependent origination. So can I set this here?
It's yours. Everyone.
Thank you. There's also some material that still doesn't make a lot of sense and makes me quite nervous to talk about. One of those is the question, what is perfect Shila? What is perfect morality? That comes up quite a bit. Also, there's a lot of talk about the jhanas. And there is in Buddhism a lot of controversy around whether or not the jhana states are things that are necessary on the path of enlightenment, if they're helpful, if they're hindrances. And this text is quite clear that they do seem, on both accounts, important and also not the final state. So I'll begin by just reading the Buddha's last words. Does anyone know what the Buddha's last words were? Take a guess. Yes.
I've told you everything I know, go do it yourself.
Not according to this one. There is something like that though, which is at the end, he said, strive on untiringly. But before that, he says, now monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. These were the Tathagata's last words. Can anyone guess what all conditioned things are translated into in Pali? All conditioned things. It's samskara or sankhara. And then nature to decay. It's the phrase that all dharmas are samskaras. He used dhamma and samskara in the same, or dhamma and sankhara. Sorry, I'm getting the Pali and Sanskrit mixed up, but I just found it interesting that he used those two words as his last words. There's also a chapter in the Brahma Viharas, which some of you may recognize as what we say when we're praying after the as it is meditation. That is, may all beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the root of suffering. May they not be separated from the great happiness devoid of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity that is free from passion, aggression, and ignorance. But in this sutra, it's associating each of the Brahma Viharas with a jhana state. And the title of the chapter is The Way to Brahma. And it involves two Brahmins who are asking the Buddha, how do I see Brahma? And the Buddha describes the four Brahma Viharas and the first four jhana states. With his heart filled with compassion, with sympathetic joy, with equanimity he dwells, suffusing one quarter, the second, the third, the fourth. He diffuses the whole world, upwards, downwards, across, everywhere, always with a heart filled with equanimity, abundant, unbounded, without hate or ill will. He even uses the word quivering or trembling with compassion. It's quite beautiful. And it's quite well known that this is still not the final goal. Seems to be seeing Brahma as potentially not the ultimate goal. I'm not sure if but that is what came up in the commentary at the beginning. Although it does sound like a nice place to be. There's the origin of the human society, which is, I would say, something I could probably read to my child before bed. It's beautiful. I'll just give you a taste of it. There was just one mass of water, and all was darkness, blinding darkness. Neither moon nor sun appeared, no constellations or stars appeared. Night and day were not distinguished, nor months and fortnights, nor years or seasons, no male or female. Beings reckoned just as beings. And sooner or later, after a very long period of time, savory earth spread itself over the waters where those beings were. It looked just like the skin that forms itself over hot milk as it cools. It was endowed with color, smell, and taste. It was the color of fine butter, and it was very sweet, like pure wild honey. Then some being of greedy nature said, I say, what can this be? And tasted the savory earth on its finger. In so doing, it became taken by the flavor, and craving arose in it. This is from the chapter called On Knowledge of Beginnings, describing the origin of the cosmos and the origin of human society. It goes on to talk about how these bodies fed on different parts of the earth, including fungi and creepers. And as they did, their bodies became coarser and coarser until they became men and women and began to eat rice. And then there is this chapter, The Great Discourse on Origination, the chapter of the 12 links of the 12 links of dependent origination. And it looked like Sokuzan took quite a liking to that, because this book opens up to this page every time I open the book. It's been written all over and underlined, notes written in the side. And here is one of the things that he seemed to be quite intrigued with. And if anyone were to say to a monk whose mind was thus freed, the Tathagata exists after death, that would be seen by him as a wrong opinion and unfitting. Likewise, the Tathagata does not exist, both exists and does not exist, neither exists nor does not exist after death. Why so? As far, Ananda, as designated and the range of designation reaches, as far as language and the range of language reaches, as far as concepts and the range of concepts reaches, as far as understanding and the range of understanding reaches, as far as cycle reaches and revolves, that monk is liberated from all that by superknowledge. So there was another piece of paper, but I don't have it here. This is the first of 5 Nikayas. Nikaya translates as a volume. There's also the word agama or agama, which is the equivalent Sanskrit word, which is used more in the Chinese, in the Tibetan texts. But this one is the first. Then there is the Samyutta Nikaya. I can't remember all of them. I had them written down, but I don't have those notes. So there's the middle length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya. There is a Nikaya which lists things by number. So if you want to know, for instance, all of the things that started with 4, you can go to this Nikaya. Then there is the miscellaneous Nikaya, which is the 5th, which isn't as popular, but it still has a lot of old texts in it, like the Dhammapada. It has there's a Nikaya that the nuns wrote, and there's a dense amount of information that is repeated across these volumes that I find, again, a way of returning to inspiration. We take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. This idea of returning to a word that may not be exact, but perhaps returning to just the foundation of how to teach, how to practice. And that can be inspiring for us. So over the next bit of time, I will be reading these and bringing some of that information to you. So, are there any questions?
still bowing. What is the name of the book again? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. It's called the Digha, Digha, Digha Nikaya. This one was translated by Maurice Walsh. James?
Oh, James Bowen, could you, I don't know, hold those up to the screen or something, or put a screenshot up later on which books they are? I know, Kindle and Audible has like audiobooks of, they have audiobooks of all the discourses, but I think they also have Kindle books of all of these. And so I'm kind of sick. I can't talk very much COVID. So, but yeah, sorry.
Mhm. Thanks, James. I really enjoy listening to this from an Audible account. So they're all over the internet. I think you start to learn who your favorite translators are. There are many.
Yeah. So.
Are further questions? Yes.
When you're bowing, one of the quotations you were citing, I think it was tied in with the Brahmavatara. You said, heart filled with compassion, and then two words, trembling and quivering with compassion. What is it to have a heart filled with compassion in this path, bowing?
So Kazan talks about compassion being something that potentially doesn't arise as something that's not a feeling. And yet we're taught in the Maitri Bhavana to speak words, may all beings be happy, and perhaps rustle up an intention for there to be happiness that arises in other. So that area is quite confusing to me. And the way that I was taught was to focus on the very light feelings, the very light vibrations of the body, and imagine those as coming out of the heart center. I don't do that practice anymore. The array of feelings that arises from very subtle, that feel very good, feel very light, feel like heavenly, as though you're ascending, contrasted with the feelings that are dense, nauseating, heavy, pulling you down toward hell. It would only seem likely that on a relative level, that which feels as though it's floating and is somewhat pleasant may be associated with some of these less interruptive, negative, heavy, hatred, ill will types of feelings. It's where my mind is going, but it's not quite. Yes.
When you're bowing, can we cultivate compassion? Bowing?
I would say certain teachers would say yes. I would say I'm here not to mess around with what I like and don't like, but instead to learn to be with what's arising. I've asked that question quite a few times. Is there such a thing as a balm that we can practice every so often when what feels like our mind is cut open and there's so much negativity that's arising? And that word doesn't seem to arise in the teachings of Sokuzan, that we don't need to be turning away from anything that's arising, that whether it's hell or heaven, perhaps we're in a passage of hell. Maybe that happens for the entire lifetime, or maybe that's just for a moment and the rest of the life is heaven. But it seems to me it's a whole lot easier to align oneself with practice when your hand is in the fire.
Shlomo bowing, what was it you were saying about perfect Sheila? Bowing.
It appears to show up in the very first chapter. It's called, I was just saying it's talked about quite a bit. And I didn't, it's really about refraining. So a refraining from taking life, abandoning, taking what is not given. It's very abandoning false speech. It has the verbiage that appears that you have stopped something, or you restrain yourself, or you avoid a conduct that kills or steals or speaks lies, etc., etc. The Pali Canon goes into other types of morality, which involves not adorning oneself or not sleeping in high luxurious beds. It's a little different. What is perfect Sheila or Sila? That seems to be a teaching that we are continuing to investigate here. Would you like to comment? Okay. James?
Yeah, James Bowling. I was gonna say that in the poly they do like the three things of virtue, concentration training, and then wisdom training, and they do it in different order because that's how they like it, you know, kind of thing. But I don't know. I don't understand what they mean by sila because it's confusing, arbitrary. Do you get the same feeling with that? That they don't explain what is virtuous? Um,
I actually have the feeling that they're very detailed about what virtue is in the early texts. And may have said this before, but to me it feels like a child gate or a fence that you would put around little lambs so they don't escape. That's how the Pali Canon shows up to me. It's very, very rigid, and Sheila, I need to talk to you about how to use these words in the sense of what you can do for livelihood. At one point, it even talks about not doing somersaults. I mean, there are a lot of rules and they're very, very detailed. Whereas Sokuzan's description of Sheila is to sit down and face the wall. This is the discipline as he teaches it. He also teaches to observe, to feel, to use your own intelligence around the standards that society and even Buddhism have set up. He encourages us to step out of this fenced-in area and find your own authority. Further questions, Ondo?
Ondo bowing. You had quoted a piece on page 223, I remember.
Yes.
How does that fit into your understanding of dependent origination? Bowing.
To be honest, this area, this teaching, which I did learn long ago, the 12 links of dependent origination, the causation that everything arises is caused by something else, is not something that I understand or have seen in my practice. It is a finger pointing to the moon, and I'm still looking at the finger.
Ondo bowing, can you read that passage again? Bowing.
So the chapter begins with going through the reverse of the 12 links. And as we know, the 12 links are aging and death, birth, clinging, craving, feeling, contact, mind and body, consciousness. And has consciousness a condition? Yes. What conditions consciousness? The mind and the body. And it continues to talk about that toward the middle. The section that Sokuzan was emphasizing was what's called the fourfold negation. The Tathagata does not exist. Both exists and does not exist. Neither exists nor does not exist after death. Why so? As far, Ananda, as designation and the range of designation reaches, as far as language and the range of language reaches, as far as concepts and the range of concepts reaches, as far as understanding and the range of understanding reaches, as far as the cycle reaches and revolves, that monk is liberated from all that by super knowledge. And then he says, note index 351. I'll have to find it, but I'm wondering if the super knowledge is prajna. I'm not sure. Do you have further questions there?
Divine, do you have a way to paraphrase what you just read?
I don't. And that's why I'm here. When
you're bowing, in the story of the origin of, I think it was human society, the one you're going to read to Anaya. I was taken by the phrase blinding darkness. How can, or, yeah, what is blinding darkness?
So the paragraph before that is talking about a time of contraction where they're born in a different world, a Brahma world. They're feeding on delight, self-luminous, moving through air, glorious, and they stay like that for a very long time. Feeding on delight, self-luminous. But sooner or later, after a very long period, the world begins to expand again. At the time of expansion, the beings from this world, having passed away, are mostly reborn in this world. And then it says, at that period, there was just one mass of water, and all was darkness, blinding darkness. Neither moon nor sun appeared. No constellations or stars appeared. Night and day were not distinguished. So that's interesting that there was no night or day, but there was some sort of blinding darkness. What is darkness? That's not night. Then I have to read this one. This one won't be in, well, it might be in Eli's bedtime stories. And these beings set to and fed on the rice. And this lasted a very long time. As they did so, their bodies became coarser still, and the difference in their looks became even greater. And the females developed female sex organs, and the males developed male organs, and the women became excessively preoccupied with men, and the men with women. Owing to this excessive preoccupation with each other, passion was aroused, and their bodies burnt with lust. And later, because of this burning, they indulged in sexual activity. I wonder how they were born prior. You said to have fun up here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Natsumi bowing. It seems like I experience a contrast with the older, I mean, really any older texts that are not within the context of our current lives, some contrast in maybe like the morality and rigidity of rules or things like that. And I'm wondering, what is it to relate directly to older teachings when they sometimes seem so different?
It seems that relating to any text is for me difficult and conceptual, and especially when they say the Blessed One and there's a lot of repetition. But as far as there being so many rules, I have to return to just the practice that this is material for the mind to be turned toward the Dharma, perhaps led by the Dharma, at times perhaps inspired, but ultimately your own practice and the words of the teacher sitting in front of you are a beacon, if I could use that word. Thanks. Shodo, did you want to ask a question?
We're bowing. What is that origin story saying about like how we're rooted in desire or something, just because of that first taste? Could you say more about that, Bowing?
It was as though it said they were feeding off. What were they feeding off? In the beginning, they were feeding on delight, feeding on self-luminous. Oh, they were just feeding on delight. It was as though there was no material. And as they began, it's almost like the apple, but I don't, this is the first time I read anything like this. I don't know. Did you know something like this even existed?
Well, first I've heard it.
I love even how it's talking about, and then the world expanded, and then the world contracted, and many, many years passed, that there's even something that appears to be cycles, that things have originated. And I didn't even complete how these beings died. So maybe it'll tell us next week what happens to us. What happens as we get coarser and coarser, as we begin to eat the earth. Does this information aggravate you? Does it inspire you? What's your relationship with it?
Bowing. Had a different question. How is desire related to being? Bowing.
I'm going to say, go back to the page 223. When would you, we were talking about birth, becoming, clinging, craving. Are you talking about one of those specifically when you talk about desire?
So I think so, but I was maybe just more so using that image. It seems like it was saying that the beingness was started from our desire and like feeding that. I was curious if you could go into that.
Did it say beingness? Because it seemed as though, okay, it seemed as though being was already present, but the desire was creating a coarser body. And it's interesting, some of the texts use that idea of gross sensation and subtle sensation. Is there such a thing as a coarse sensation and something that's less coarse? I wouldn't know what the word would be, but it was as though these beings were living in a place in the air that had like not the solidity. This is the earth in us here. When Sokuzan, we've talked about, when Sokuzan talks about don't remember gravity, that's earth. And is it possible that this isn't a falling from heaven story or something that's bad? Is this consciousness that is given the opportunity from the bottom earth, from the bottom up, to explore itself? Is it even possible to see consciousness or explore consciousness when everything is very light and almost imperceptible in form? So when you said that question, my response was about contact, that without this, there would be no contact and no opportunity to see impermanence, to see the rising and passing away, and ultimately to see that there's nothing there. Could I have a final question? James?
James Bowen. Do you know about the three ways the world can be destroyed by fire, water, or wind, and then how things reform from the Brahma world down to hell?
I'm not familiar with that, although I've heard the stories, and I believe we're like preparing to be destroyed by water in this era. Is that correct?
I think there's a thing with Ananda saying fire, but I
Okay.
don't really know. It's kind of weird to tell. I mean, it's visibly really in the future, but the thing with them being in the sky, I think, is them going from the Brahma world and then falling down. Like everything goes from heaven to, and then goes and degrades. So,
If I come across that in the readings, then I'll bring it up. But that's very interesting. Thank you, James. I hope you
all right.
feel better.
Thank you.
So if there aren't any final questions, thank you.